Elves and goblins were thought of as alien visitors by medieval men and women. UFOs and ETs are modern man's technological age version of these visitors. With the explosion of the atomic bomb, new mysterious and uncontrollable forces seem to have been unleashed on the world on an unprecedented scale. And at the same time, extraterrestrial beings began appearing in droves in our skies. Starting in 1947, thousands of alien spaceships were sighted. And soon, we had encounters with alien creatures, followed by abductions, government cover-ups, cooperation with aliens, aliens among us intent on taking over the world. What is this phenomenon? Is it a collective delusion induced by the end of the millennium anxiety? Or is it a strained effort to grasp phenomena which we are not equipped to understand? Where are these alien visitors from? Are they real? What if they are not from other planets? What if they are from other dimensions? And we can make a case that they have been interacting with us as long as we have been here on Earth. In the next stories, we will show you the different ways extraterrestrials are showing up and impacting human life. Some of the methods you will see are magic visions of other realities, while others seem altogether terrifying. This is the Alien Enigma. Stories of animal mutilations have been some of the most baffling reports emerging in the 60s. Linda Moulton Howe is one of the most respected researchers in this field. She has won an Emmy for her documentary work in this area, and her conclusions are difficult to ignore.
When I was director of special projects at the CBS affiliate in Denver, Colorado, from 1976 to 1983, that I was sent files and newspaper reports about unusual animal deaths ranging Canada, the United States, Mexico, Central America, South America, Australia, the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, and parts of Europe, all reporting the same strange pattern of excisions from animals, cattle, horses, and other domestic animals, and there were cases of deer, elk, and wild animals being found the same, with an ear missing, eye missing, the tongue removed in a vertical cut deep within the throat, jaw flesh stripped, usually from the half side of the face, sometimes in a circle, and this was removed. The genitals removed, male and female, high deep excision in the belly, and the rectum poured out. It was my shock to find, after a month of doing interviews with ranchers, with sheriffs, with deputies, with a few veterinarians who would talk with me off the record, and a few fellow journalists, that I was hearing encounters with football field-sized orange glowing lights in fields the night before some of these animals were found dead with these strange excisions. Or a sheriff who was out with a deputy in a pasture because there had been repeated mutilations, and suddenly a beam of light lights up the entire pasture, according to the sheriff, brighter than daylight. These were the stories that I was hearing. That circumstantial evidence pointed to the sky because law enforcement could not find tracks at the scene. These animals were found on wet sand, on snow, in mud, with no tracks around their bodies, including no tracks of the animal itself. How did it get to that site? That's why law enforcement, right to the 60s, began looking to the sky, saying, however this is being done, someone is coming in, picking these animals up, taking them somewhere, and for some unknown reason, bringing them back.
This fall, we had 10 mutilations, 8 in Sweetwater County and 2 in Bagot County. And in 1975, we had 16. From everywhere I go, they tell me that it's predators, which I do not believe.
I began to realize, slowly but surely, that I was in a story in which people off the record in law enforcement kept telling me, we're dealing with something that is not from here. We're dealing with something from outer space. We're dealing with creatures that are not human.
A Colorado man named Drexel Lawson has a livestock removal service.
The incisions a lot of times looks like some type of burn or laser.
This mobile laser unit stands about 8 feet high and weighs about 400 pounds. Clearly, it's not a convenient tool to drag around remote ranch lands.
And it was finally in one of the interviews that I was doing on film. He was the chief investigator in the district attorney's office in Trinidad, Colorado, in the fall of 1979. I had asked the same questions to law enforcement everywhere I had gone, and no one would talk to me on the record. And I'm rolling the camera and I'm asking the same question. Who or what do you think is involved with these mutilations of these animals? And Lou Girotto, chief investigator in the district attorney's office in Trinidad, Colorado, looked at that camera straight and said,
"It's very, very possible that these mutilations are being done by creatures from outer space."
By the early 60s to the mid-60s was the first emergence of what has come to be called missing time, or the human abduction syndrome, and at exactly the same time was the first reportings of unusual animal deaths with the ear, the eye, the tongue, the jaw, the genitals, and the rectum taken. So suddenly I also had a missing time case where a woman of 5 people saw a beam of light, suffered headaches, and 5 years later we finally get to do a hypnosis session in which, when her amnesia breaks, she described seeing a brown and white calf rising in a pale beam of light.
I can see an animal being taken up in this. I can see it squirming and trying to get free.
And that was, I think, the very first step for me of realizing that I was perhaps in an unprecedented story where fellow human beings were dealing in their pastures, their backyards, with something not terrestrial, being able to interact, pluck animals, take the same patterns of tissue and fluid, and return those animals for unknown reasons. The two phenomena, the human abduction syndrome and the animal mutilations, began at the same time, have paralleled through the last several decades. Together, I think that they are the flip side of the same kind of effort by whatever this intelligence is, and that their goal, perhaps among many goals, is to harvest genetic material from humans and animals. Why? I have no idea.
Her story is too conclusive to leave any doubt about the gruesome and possibly non-human presence in the animal pastures. No one understands why. Ufologists claim aliens need the hormonal secretions to sustain themselves. However, a civilization eons ahead of us should be able to synthesize enzymes. What is the real purpose or message? Cases of human mutilation tied to UFOs have also been reported. It is hard to fathom the intentions of aliens helping humans and mutilating them at the same time. In fact, abductees talk about different cultures of aliens with different intentions, some benevolent and some downright destructive, just like the angels and demons of legends and myth.
This is the first case ever reported in the world of a human mutilation by extraterrestrial. A man was found about 48 hours after his death with several wounds, cuts in the body, and with removal of many vital organs. This is a photograph made by the police of the state of São Paulo. Many holes were found, symmetrical holes, perforations were found in the man's head, throughout which were extracted part of the brain tissue. This is a very amazing picture, but it's very, very similar, fantastically similar to the ones we have taken from animals mutilated all over the world. Here you can see clearly different holes. One of them is in the man's leg, the left leg, and one is in the umbilical area. Throughout this hole was extracted a lot of organs, like the stomach, the liver, a part of the lung, the heart, and the intestines. Experts that performed the autopsies in the body concluded that it was used as some sort of a sucking device.
In 1970, the Vietnam War was taking a heavy toll on our nation, with the pretext that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were directing their operations from their sanctuaries across the Vietnam borders. President Nixon expanded the war to neighboring Laos and Cambodia. William English was a U.S. officer stationed in Vietnam during 1970 with the U.S. Army Special Forces. In several interviews with the press, conducted in the late 80s, he recounted an extraordinary incident he lived through.
In May 1970, I was assigned to lead a team to Laos to recover a B-52 bomber that had been downed by a UFO. Of course, the Army didn't say anything about UFOs, but we all knew what it was. The last communication with the B-52 had been about a hostile encounter with a craft that was shaped like a blinding bright light. My team traveled by helicopter over Laos, and after a few days we found the B-52 lying in the jungle. When we approached the plane, we saw the most amazing thing. The fuselage and wings were totally intact with no damage whatsoever, including the bay full of unexploded bombs. The area around it and the trees looked like they were not touched by the crash. We found the bodies of the pilots strapped in their seat, with their bodies cored out in the same manner as the cattle being found all over the world at the time. There was not a drop of blood in their bodies. My team recovered all the documents on board, we photographed the bodies, the plane, and the site around the crash, and exploded the bombs. On the way out of the jungle, we were ambushed by the Viet Cong. My buddies all died. I was wounded, but I escaped capture. I wandered through the jungle for days until a reconnaissance group found me. As soon as I got back, the Army took the photos, which were classified top secret, and disappeared instantly. I was never able to get my hands on them again. And later, when I went looking for the records, there wasn't anything anywhere about the B-52.
The Air Force has no records of the B-52 lost in Laos in 1970, nor of William English's service record. English claims it is part of a government cover-up. He also reports that since he went public with the story, several attempts have been made on his life. Is this a bizarre, paranoid fantasy? Or another example of disconcerting sorcery from the skies and standard government denial? This story shows an abduction leading to a positive, life-transforming experience. In this case, the aliens appear to have a constructive purpose and to have achieved it.
Im Winter 1991 reiste ich mit ein paar Freunden durch Florida.
I was visiting Florida in the winter of 1991, and I decided to meet with some friends in Everglades City. I left Miami in the rain. It was an overcast day with heavy storm clouds, but it didn't bother me. I visited an Indian village, and when I was ready to take off, I noticed an unusual cloud formation moving in the vortex like a hurricane or a tornado. And then I saw this glow, this light coming out of the clouds. It was beautiful and strange. I drove on and soon forgot about it. I decided to take a ride on the sawgrass. The sky had cleared suddenly. I saw this bright light again crossing the sky. I had this eerie feeling that it was following me. I stopped to look at the grassland. I took a bike and rode for a couple of hours and took pictures. It was all so peaceful. Suddenly, I felt my limbs becoming heavy. Every step was getting heavier. I saw the light again, and this time right on top of me. and I was blinded. And the next thing that I remember, I'm in my car and driving on the road. How could I have blanked out and not remember how I got back to the car? It was at least a quarter of a mile from where I was to the parking lot. I looked at my watch, and a half hour had passed. I felt lost, disconnected. When I returned to Zurich, the physical problems began. I felt nauseous. I started seeing lights, like fireworks, in my field of vision. They came and went. Then I started hearing buzzing sounds. One morning I woke up with a nosebleed. I never had a nosebleed before. I was a biology student at the university, but I stopped going to classes. I was feeling strange and disconnected. My parents were worried, but I didn't tell them anything. One day, I had this urge to go to the zoo. And a strange thing happened there. I saw this little man, like 3 feet high, standing next to the bisons. I knew it was not a hallucination. It was too real. And this got me really scared. I knew then I had to see a psychiatrist. Dr. Weller was friendly. We talked, and then she put me through a hypnotic regression.
Einen silbernen Streifen, wenn vom Boden kommt?
I see a thread, a silver thread stretching from the ground, disappearing in the sky. And now I'm in it, lifting from the ground. I'm flying. I'm suspended in this tunnel. It's an endless corridor with the sound of 1,000 buzzing bees. I feel myself vibrating. I feel my cells are vibrating. And now I'm in this huge cavern. Everything seems to float. I can't move. These creatures, they're talking to me. They're flooding my mind telepathically. And they're telling me I have to wake up and pay attention to my life.
In Jungian psychology, the thread represents the umbilical cord. It is a symbolic connection with some higher state. In this sense, it also brings nourishment and life. What Hannah seems to express is a spiritual message about the loss of connection with her true self.
Then they take me in this other room, and it's a replica of the cypress swamp I was traveling through before, except now it's dying and it's lifeless. And I start sobbing and I can't control my tears. They tell me the earth is sensitive like any being. Listen to the earth, the spirit of the earth, and it will tell you what to do.
The abduction experience leaves Hannah more open, more conscious. She is combining the information received during the abduction with her inner intuitive drive to alter her life radically, to transform herself.
I feel happy. I feel connected. I can't tell what the experience was about, and I don't know where these beings are from or what they're made of. They told me that what we see is just the form they take when they enter our dimension. Why me? I don't know. But I understand things differently now. I've left the university temporarily, and I'm working. I'm involved in a project that educates people about the environment, and I feel fulfilled for the first time in my life.
Whether she had this experience in our three-dimensional reality, or in a parallel reality, or as a subconscious projection, the truth is that this young girl's life has been radically changed. The origin of the experience remains an unsolved mystery. When Captain Larry Coyne, a pilot in command of an Army helicopter, filed a report in 1973 called Mid-Air Collision with a UFO, he pried open the secrecy door of the military establishment. The report was released under the Freedom of Information Act in the 80s.
I, Larry Cohn, was the pilot in command. The flight crew assigned was Captain First Lieutenant Arrigo Jezzi, co-pilot, Sergeant Robert Yanisek, crew chief, Sergeant John Healy, flight medic. The Huey was returning from Columbus, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio, and at 11 p.m. east-southeast of Mansfield Airport, in the vicinity of Mansfield, Ohio, Sergeant Yanisek saw a red light on the east horizon, 90 degrees to the flight path of the helicopter. Approximately 30 seconds later, Sergeant Yanisek yelled that the object was converging on the helicopter at the same altitude, at an airspeed in excess of 600 knots, and on a mid-air collision heading. I saw the converging object, took over the controls of the aircraft, and initiated a power descent from 2,500 feet to 1,700 feet to avoid impact with the object. A radio call was initiated to Mansfield Tower, who acknowledged the helicopter and was asked by myself if there were any high-speed performance aircraft flying in the vicinity of Mansfield Airport. However, there was no response received from the tower. We expected impact from the object instead. However, the object stayed over us for some time. A beam of green light opened up from the bottom and lit the interior of the chopper as if in full daylight. I tried to contact Mansfield, but both radio channels were dead for at least 7 to 8 minutes after the incident. I returned the aircraft at 3,500 feet and flew it back to Cleveland, Ohio. The flight plan was closed after the FAA Flight Service Station notified of the incident. Mr. Porter, the commander of the 83rd U.S. Air Command in Columbus, was also notified of the incident.
The press dismissed the story as a case of collective hallucination. The case was shelved by the Army with no further explanation. Hundreds of similar cases are routinely dismissed in the same manner. However, 4 Army pilots trained to recognize hostile situations believed they had had an encounter with a UFO. Was the UFO real? Psychologist Carl Jung asked the same question. His conclusion was that UFOs might be both real and fantasy, somewhere between the dream world and reality. Not a satisfying answer for 4 military men, but something closer to understanding the enigma. Linda Moulton Howe has reported on mysterious black helicopters being sighted in the animal pastures. Black or unmarked helicopters have also been reported in Vietnam, although combat situations can be confusing. This story, as related by researchers Fawcett and Greenwood, points to combat situations with the appearance of crafts not from this world. In July 1968, Newsweek reported that American troops were spotting dozens of unidentified helicopters flying south of the DMZ. According to a Newsweek reporter present at the scene the night of June 15th at the headquarters in Dong Ha, an Army captain received a radio communication about a dozen supposed helicopters flying over the DMZ. Air Force jets were dispatched to the area, and according to a Navy pilot, 1 aircraft was shot down. A reconnaissance plane was flown over the area, but found no trace whatsoever of the wreckage. The only trace was a burned hole in the ground. This is similar to several other cases in which a burned spot or a circular imprint is found after an alleged UFO sighting. The South Vietnamese government reported that at the same time, a U.S. Navy ship had been mysteriously sunk, blaming the U.S. Navy plane for the incident. Although accidents of this kind are common in wartime, both the Army and the Navy issued statements pointing to a baffling and unidentified enemy. General George Brown, Air Force Chief of Staff, made the following statement in 1973. They were not called UFOs. They were called enemy helicopters, and they were seen up around the DMZ in the summer of 1968. This caused some shooting there, and there was no enemy at all involved. In the baffling world of alien abductions, some of the most puzzling mysteries are missing pregnancies. Investigator Wendelle Stevens is quite familiar with this syndrome.
In the 3 cases that I looked at, all 3 of the women seemed to have become pregnant unexpectedly, and then they became pregnant without the presence of a husband or a boyfriend. In both cases, they had dreams of being abducted aboard a spacecraft and being artificially impregnated. And in both cases, the babies were taken at about the 3rd month, and they were taken in such a way that the mother was pregnant up to that time and certified so by the doctors, and then she lost the baby overnight without a great loss of blood, woke up the next morning and suddenly she is not pregnant. She goes back to the doctor, and the doctor says, we don't know what happened to the fetus. We don't know whether it's an experiment in manipulating genetics, in cross-hybridizing species, or what.
On the night of June 30th, 1983, in a small town near Indianapolis, Indiana, Kathy Davis saw a light sweeping the lawn in front of her house. In the morning, she found an 8-foot wide circle burnt in the grass. After developing a series of physical and mental problems, she underwent regressive hypnosis conducted by New York researcher Bud Hopkins. She discovered that she had been abducted regularly and frequently since childhood.
I'm pretty sure it was September 23rd, 1993. I was watching TV, and a bright flashing light caught my eye out the front door. We all ran out to look at it, and it was tremendous white light with multitudes of sparkling color in it. And it got very bright and large, and then it got very small and tiny to a pinpoint, and then it kept doing that, getting bigger and littler as it was moving down to the tree line and back and forth across the trees. I was very excited and shocked when I saw this light in the sky. And then I started to get a little nervous when I saw something walk towards me in the road. And then we also heard a beeping sound. I had a tumor that had been photographed on an ultrasound machine in my uterus, and then we had this experience, and then when I had the surgery to remove the tumor and have the hysterectomy, the tumor was gone. So I tend to feel that something happened that night to remove that tumor. Perhaps it wasn't a tumor. Maybe it was a fetus. I don't know.
Kathy Davis claims that during an abduction in 1983, she was shown a child which was the product of her earlier impregnation in the 70s. This child was a cross between a human and a humanoid, and in her words, looked like an angel.
I had a missing pregnancy that has left a lot of unanswered questions in my life. I've had some memories of that pregnancy, that child who was a girl. I remembered seeing her later in life, as an older child, one time, and she was accompanied by those gray beings. I've had many experiences with some life form other than human in my life since I was 5, all the way up until just recently. Most of the time, these beings that I have seen, had the experiences with, are about 4 feet tall, 4.5 feet tall, kind of grayish looking, large heads, really black eyes that kind of look through you rather than just looking at you. When I was younger, growing up, I had medical examinations, I guess for lack of a better way to put them, where samples of my tissue and hair and skin and nails and saliva were removed. And painful, alarming gynecological exams were performed on me. And I was never told why. I was never given any explanation as to why they were doing this to me. I don't think they intentionally wanted to hurt me, because there were a lot of times when I would feel pain, they would take the pain away. I don't know why they've been abducting me, other than perhaps because they took my mother at some point before I was born, and they're following genetic lines. I don't even know if they come from a planet. I've seen things that make me feel almost as if it's an interdimensional or a time thing. But then I've seen things that also make me feel like some of it might be extraterrestrial. And I've also seen things, you know, I've also heard things from other people too that make me feel as if they may even already be here living amongst us and we don't even know it yet.
Kathy Davis's story was told in Bud Hopkins' best-selling book called Intruders. She has undergone a definite traumatic experience, which almost shattered her life. She sounds believable, and yet the aliens don't. If aliens are so technologically advanced, why do their medical techniques resemble 19th century procedures?
If it doesn't come from Nebraska or Leeds, England, or Milano or something, if it's not human, in other words, it is other. And to try to predict what other would do or what other has as its capabilities is just, to me, totally futile.
I've had experiences with many different types of alien creatures, going all the way back to my childhood. One of the main ones I've encountered is what I call a chalky-colored creature. It's about 4 to 5 feet tall. It doesn't have any hair. It has huge black eyes, no pupils, no whites, no ears, no hair. All of the creatures look alike. I can't tell whether each one is a male or a female. They all look identical. These creatures have taken me aboard the craft. The method they use to get me aboard their craft is some kind of light, like a beam of light. I find myself in this energy force that looks like a light field, and the next thing I know, I'm aboard their craft. These creatures perform medical experiments on me. They are extracting ova from me. They scrape tissue samples. I've also seen aboard their craft the products of what they're doing with their genetic experimentation. I've seen fetuses suspended in transparent containers. Inside the containers lies a little hybrid-looking baby that looks part human, part alien. They seem to be making a hybrid race.
Abduction cases outside the United States are not reported as frequently, except in countries that are open to the UFO question. This hypnotic session was filmed in a psychiatrist's office in Finland. The woman did not appear overwhelmed by the experience. In fact, she perceived the aliens as a source of energy.
Minkä kokoinen se on?
Se on iso. Mä olen siellä sisällä.
Katso, miten sinä olet joutunut sinne. Näetkö, miten sinua viedään?
Tiedän, mä huudan. Mutta ei mitään ääntä tule.
Ääntä ei tule. Kuka sinua vie sinne?
Niitä on paljon.
Ai, niitä on paljon. Kerro tarkasti, millaisia he ovat.
En mä halua katsoa.
Katso, se on filmi, niin kuin videokuva. Et sinä ole siellä itse. Sä näet kuvan.
Mutta niin sydämestä.
Nyt olet suojassa täällä. Se ei ole... Sinä näet sellaisen kuvan vaan siellä. Ja voit kertoa siitä. Enempiä kuin sinä.
Ihan oikea. Nyt on paljon niitä pieniä poikia.
Mikä näköisiä ovat?
Ne sekin ruipeloita. Ne on pitkät kädet. Ne vaan seisoo ja katsoo mua.
Minkälainen asu heillä on?
Ei niillä ole vaatteita.
Ei niillä ole vaatteita.
Sillä yhdellä on.
Onko se sama kokoinen?
Ei, kun se on niistä kaikkein isoin.
Isompi kuin sinä tai minkä kokoinen?
Samoa isompi vähän. Sillä on valkoinen takki. Se asuu siinä. No on siinä niin kuin sen takia, että ne pitää kiinni, jos mä liikun. Miten ne tutkii jollain tavalla.
Kuka tutkii?
Se valkotakkinen. Se laittaa mulle jotain sisään.
Laittaa sinulle sisään jotain. Minkälaisessa asennossa sinä olet?
Mä oon selälläni.
Kerro lisää.
Kun se laittaa sitten sen esineen sisään, niin se sanoo mulle, että mulle syntyy poika.
Kysy siltä, että kuinka sinut on hedelmöitetty sitä poikaa saamaan.
Se on laitettu keinotekoisesti minuun.
Se on laitettu keinotekoisesti sinuun. Mutta mistä se solu on alkuaan otettu, kun se ei ole sinusta? Kysy se häneltä.
Se on heidän omiaan.
Se on heidän omiaan.
He on puhunut 4 ulottuvuudesta.
Että he ovat 4 ulottuvuudesta. Jaha, jostakin sellaisesta, jota me emme tässä pääse tavoittamaan.
Joo, se valkotakkinen.
Se valkotakkinen.
Se oli mulle vihainen.
Mistä hän oli vihainen sinulle?
No kun mä puhuin koko ajan. Ja heräsin monta kertaa.
Heräsit monta kertaa. Oliko hän sukupuoliyhteydessä sinuun?
Ei. Hän katsoi korvia.
Hän katsoi korvia vaan.
Ja sanoi, että toinen on operoitu jo. Että mun pitää nukkua, että hän saa sen toisenkin koron operoitua. Ja sitten sen nenän katsoi semmonen pieni poika, joka oli kirkas.
Kirkas? Siis oliko hänellä sellainen kiiltävä asu? Vai millä tavalla?
Niin, se on sellainen valkoisen hohtava iho. Hyvin hohtava iho.
Oliko se ihokin myös tällainen, ettei se ollut vaan se vaate, joka hänessä oli?
Ei hänen pääkin ole ihan valkoinen. Hohtava valkoinen.
If these stories spring from the imagination of such diverse women from across the globe, then we are confronted with a syndrome of truly gigantic proportion. But why would these abductees choose to fake traumatic experiences and fabricate stories that subject them to endless ridicule? All these women feel these events are taking place in a realm somewhere between their minds and some other dimension. And the message they leave behind seems to be the need for universal connectedness.
Between December 1989 and March 1990, several UFOs were sighted over Belgian skies by thousands of witnesses, the police, and 5 NATO radar stations. The Belgian military attempted pursuit and destruction of the objects. The military at first admitted the incidents, but very quickly the statements were denied, which led journalist and writer Derek Sheffield to suspect a major international cover-up.
So I contacted the Belgian Air Force, and what I got back absolutely amazed me, because something happened in Belgium that had not been publicised in the British media at all. It was a sighting of such enormity, witnessed by thousands and thousands of people, that I'm surprised it didn't get into the British newspapers. This thing was in fact flying over the most densely populated part of Belgium for an hour. This was over Brussels. Somebody in Paris told me that an estimated 13,500 people saw them. Of that, we'll say 13,500, 2,600 provided written statements to the police. There were 75 police witnesses.
On March 30th, 1990, Wavre experienced an incident which was reported by 5 radar stations and triggered a chase by 2 F-16s. The F-16s took off from the Belgian base of Bevekum in pursuit of the UFOs and chased them to 6 minutes from UK airspace, then lost them.
The Belgian Air Force went after it, and once again we come into problems now. The Ministry of Defence here say that at no time was this thing, or these things, ever considered a threat. But the mere fact that the Belgian Air Force were up means that it had been classified as hostile. They're not allowed to intercept unless this is so. The movements of this object were described by the pilots and radar operators as wildly erratic and step-like, and a zigzag course was taken over the city of Brussels with the 2 F-16s in pursuit. Visual contact was not possible against the lighting of the city. What in fact the pilots said over Brussels was that this object dropped in altitude to 200 feet and they lost it among the buildings in Brussels. And they were worried, apart from the fact that they were flying fairly close together at night, they were worried of being so low to the buildings in Brussels itself. They showed intelligence because every single time the pilots attempted to lock on with a radar, they took very violent evasive action. In one radar lock-on, the object that was locked onto changed height 9 times from 200 feet to 10,000 feet in huge jumps. Then it actually changed course 7 times, sometimes quite drastically, changed speed from 115 knots to 1,800 knots in plus or minus 2 seconds. But if I can tell you that all that happened in 22 seconds, it was in fact too violent for the radars and the F-16s to hold their radar lock on, and they shook them off. And this happened many times. The Belgian NATO radars detected 8 objects. I have radar pictures taken from the F-16 radars that show 8 objects. The pilots, I gather, at one stage got quite panicky about this. And then he asked for permission to attack. Now, if anybody considers these are the actions of pilots who don't consider that an object is hostile or not, then I don't believe it. One ufologist said it was quite obvious that the Belgian thing was a tanker refueling several aircraft. And I wrote back most annoyed and said, I've never heard so much rubbish in all my life. Number one, you tell me a tanker that can accelerate from 200 knots to 1,500 in 2 seconds. You tell me of a tanker that would refuel 9 aircraft simultaneously at night at 12 o'clock midnight when they can't see anyway. Absolute nonsense.
The Belgian Ministry of Defense, Leo Delcroix, and the Air Force Chief of Operations, Alfred de Bauer, admitted the sightings and the confrontation with the UFOs. Apparently, the disclosures made to Sheffield were considered too dangerous, and immediately after, all parties denied any UFO activity.
There are many reports from witnesses on the ground in Belgium that saw these things coming towards them, changing shape all the time. I have a statement from one woman who says that she saw a triangle coming towards her, very low over the tops of some trees, that was changing from a triangle to an oblong to a square as it was coming towards her. People on the ground said at one stage that they actually saw the two F-16s turning inside the big triangle. There were two triangles, a small one and a big one. And what came out were in fact 3 balls of light with another light in the centre. But a very interesting thing happened when they processed the negative, because when they enhanced the blue on the negative, an object appeared, and it was rather like a triangle with the edges cut off. The same photograph showed an unbelievable acceleration rate of 280 kilometres to 1,800 kilometres in a few seconds. According to Professor Leon Brenning, a non-nuclear dynamic theorist at the Free University of Brussels, this would represent an acceleration of 46G and would be beyond the possibility of any human pilot to endure. So if it was declared hostile for the Belgians, then it was declared hostile for NATO. NADG, the NATO Air Defence Ground Environment Radar System, consists of 80 radar stations, all interconnected, that cover the whole of Europe. And on this particular instance, there were, I think, 4 Belgian and 1 German that detected it. We're not talking about 1 radar set. We're talking about 5 radar stations. We're not talking about 1 radar system. We're talking about 5 different radar systems. We're not talking about 1 person seeing it. We're talking about thousands on the ground seeing it and the pilots in the air seeing it. Everybody confirmed everybody else. So the things were there and radar was to be relied upon. And 1,000 miles an hour is only 6 minutes from UK airspace. The British aircraft have got to be given time to be alerted and get up to intercept them or whatever they're going to do. So they must have known about it. Admiral Hill Norton said that if it was detected by NATO radars, then it's inconceivable that we didn't know about it.
Derek Sheffield presented a petition to the European Parliament in Brussels to investigate the events of Eupen and Wavre. As it stands, the investigation is still on the agenda.
The entities operate with the same disregard for physical laws as the images of our dreams. And yet they leave implants in abductees. Design elaborate crop circles. Burn craters in the ground. And leave lives shattered and transformed. Aliens may not be of this world, but they seem as real as our thoughts, emotions, and dreams. And the alien experience feels like a new and agonized religious experience. Maybe the beginning of a new understanding of who we truly are. Elves and goblins were thought of as alien visitors by medieval men and women. UFOs and ETs are modern man's technological age version of these visitors. With the explosion of the atomic bomb, new mysterious and uncontrollable forces seem to have been unleashed on the world on an unprecedented scale. And at the same time, extraterrestrial beings began appearing in droves in our skies. Starting in 1947, thousands of alien spaceships were sighted. And soon, we had encounters with alien creatures, followed by abductions, government cover-ups, cooperation with aliens among us intent on taking over the world. What is this phenomenon? Is it a collective delusion induced by the end of the millennium anxiety? Or is it a strained effort to grasp phenomena which we are not equipped to understand? Where are these alien visitors from? Are they real? What if they are not from other planets? What if they are from other dimensions? And we can make a case that they have been interacting with us as long as we have been here on Earth. In the next stories, we will show you the different ways extraterrestrials are showing up and impacting human life. Some of the methods you will see are magic visions of other realities, while others seem altogether terrifying. This is the Alien Enigma.
There's every reason to believe that there was at least one live alien at the two crash sites in New Mexico in July 1947. And that, of course, if there was a live alien, he was examined by the U.S. government officials. There were certainly dead bodies, which were also examined.
On September 24th, 1947, the President signed a classified executive order authorizing the formation of the top-secret Majestic 12 team to investigate UFOs. Subject matter was classified 2 grades higher than the H-bomb. The history of cover-up and disinformation that followed was, in the words of Stanton Friedman, a cosmic Watergate.
What happened at Roswell was an extremely interesting event. There was a real crash, but it was orchestrated.
Given the fact that no hard evidence remains, Ed Dames suggests another theory for the Roswell crash.
There were bodies. People picked bodies up. People touched debris on the ground. But about 48 hours after that event happened, there were no bodies. There were no pieces. There were no debris. The people that participated in the event did not know what happened to the debris. They became confused. They had memories of the event, but there were no pieces and no evidence. The reason that is because these races that are 100 million years ahead of us went back in time and changed the event. They prevented the crash from happening. There is no such thing as alien bodies in storage anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world. It did not happen. It never happened. There were alien bodies on the ground for about 48 hours at most, but that is all. Then they disappeared. They disappeared because time changed. The event was erased.
This event you are about to hear, codenamed The Incident, took place on the night of October 7th, 1965, at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
Researcher Sam Sherman obtained the military records under the Freedom of Information Act. The tapes he was sent were scrambled and totally incomprehensible. He spent close to 1 year decoding the tapes and reconstructed the story of what happened that night.
Hundreds of U.S. scientists were at Edwards that day and night to see demonstrations of advanced rocket aircraft. Little did they know that that night they would witness a most unusual demonstration of advanced craft technology from another planet. These are actual declassified and descrambled Air Force audio recordings of the startling incident.
Okay, I was wondering, we supposedly are having quite an invasion over here.
We have some confirmed reports of some unidentified flying objects in your area. Okay. Probably 6 or more from Edwards and climbing slowly. They're red, white, and green flashing lights. I'll go and watch that bright when it gets. Okay, sir. There's 3 more of them. Wendelle south and dim, almost in a straight line. Almost horizontal. I don't like to get on with my fancy type thing.
The tape indicates that a squadron from another planet was overflying the base. An F-106 jet fighter interceptor was launched to chase after the UFOs.
Edwards, do you still have any of these UFOs in sight?
Yes.
Okay, try to pick out one you want us to intercept. We'll take a 0-1 on him.
Have him proceed. Have one at 075. Couldn't say the distance.
Right.
Hi, what heading's the interceptor on now?
He's on a 080 heading.
Roger, approximately there was approximately 5 to 7 objects. Green and red and white flashing lights. They were quickly moving. It would be stationary for some time, and it quickly moved straight up.
Did civilians in the Edwards Air Base area see anything unusual? A report from a local driver was phoned in that night.
We have the UFO information dispatcher at Base Operations Norton on also. He's listening here now. Yeah, okay.
Supposed to determine the location where the sighting took place and refer the party to report that to the nearest base where the sighting occurred, which would be Edwards or George.
Yeah, okay. Now, this is the deputy in between again. Didn't this occur, though, close to Cajon Pass, where he saw this?
Yes, so he said this bright red object. He saw it kind of hovering. All of a sudden, it made a pass right down over his car and right across the highway, and said it paralleled the highway for quite a while, and then just took off, and it's like death. He thought it was going to hit the car. I'll be glad to pass it up to Edwards. I could give you the name of the UFO officer at Edwards. I have it on my report here. Let's see, Captain Bilent at Edwards. Base Ops.
You have just found out that Edwards had an officer, Captain Bilent, who was in charge of UFOs, and Norton Air Base had a UFO dispatcher. This information extracted from Air Force records reveals for the first time that the government, in spite of its official denials, takes the UFO matters
very seriously. Abductions started in the 70s on a large scale. This one from 1973 is the most researched case in the world, a classic case that has baffled researchers, the U.S. Army, and the U.S. Navy. The conclusion? The aliens are mischievous and untrustworthy.
On October the 11th, 1973, Calvin Parker, a friend of mine, and myself went fishing on the Pascagoula River in Pascagoula, Mississippi. It was probably a little after the sun went down in the evening. And we were fishing from a pier out into the river. And there was a brilliant light, and when they took hold of me, I felt pain in my left arm. I seemed to rise above the ground to the height they were into the light beam, and they carried me aboard the craft. And inside the room that we were in was probably round. It was glowing from the walls, and in front of me, something came out from the wall. It appeared to be a big eye. It moved up in front of me in my face, and it lingered there a while, and then it moved downward. And it came back over the top of my head and back in front of me again. And this thing remained there a few minutes, and then it went back into the wall. And by that time, these things had come back and took hold of me, and they released me, and I fell to the ground. It was this time I saw Calvin, and he was standing there with his arms outstretched. He appeared to be going in shock. We decided that we'd call Keesler Air Force Base, which is only about 25 or 30 miles from there. I called Keesler, and they told me that they didn't handle those things, that we'd have to go through our sheriff's department.
Hickson and Parker did not know that the sheriff's phone was ringing off the hook that night with calls about strange lights in the skies. A gas station operator who was a former pilot called and said a UFO with flashing blue lights was heading east toward Mobile, Alabama. According to FBI files, the two men were interrogated in the Jackson, Mississippi Sheriff's Office.
I took a polygraph test which was positive, that proved I was telling the truth. We took voice stress analyzers, even sodium pentothal. I've done everything that I can think, or they can think of, to prove that I was telling the truth.
What made the interrogation special was the presence of 12 federal security experts, including 3 Army colonels, 2 lieutenant colonels, a major, and a captain. Why would Charles Hickson, a simple shipyard worker from a small town in Mississippi, be told when communism would fall 15 years before it actually happened?
Since 1973, I've been contacted many times from these bands. They told me of world events that will happen, that communism would fall, and I told the news people about this before it did fall, and they didn't believe me. They laughed at me.
Strange sightings of unidentified submerged objects occurred around the Pascagoula nuclear shipyard. Navy intelligence got involved, as well as the Pentagon.
I was told by somebody formerly of Air Force Intelligence that we had a form of radar that disrupted their guidance systems and caused these crashes.
Was it coincidence that Hickson was a foreman in a nuclear facility which that week had launched the USS Spruance, carrying the most advanced electronic sensing and radar gear?
Here we have the conflicting implications that UFOs are letting us in on a secret about the fall of the evil empire. And at the same time, they are trying to sabotage U.S. intelligence. This type of trickery is a trait that aliens share with the elves and goblins of myth.
Salyut 6 and Soyuz 9 orbited the Earth together from June to November 1978. On the 17th of June, cosmonauts Vladimir Kovalyonok and Alexander Ivanchenov sighted a UFO. In space, they held the following conversation about what they had seen.
An object is approaching us. Our distance from the Earth is starting. Our position coordinates are 93 and 70. The object is moving away from the Earth towards us. The object is moving in the direction of 2030. It's right under our crafts. The ball, almost like a tennis ball. It's growing much larger. Right wide. It is getting closer. It's right before our crafts. It is too close. It's going away.
This tape was sent by the Soviet Space Ministry to the KGB, and it was held there in secret until after the fall of communism, when the KGB at last opened up its files. In the United States, UFO sightings by NASA remain classified top secret. However, the Russians claim to have recorded a communication from Neil Armstrong to Mission Control after his landing on the moon in 1969.
Mission Control calling Apollo 11. Columbia. This is Houston, over. These babies are huge. They're enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us.
Dr. Ajaja, a physicist and former operative of the Soviet Navy, reports that this conversation was censored by NASA, but had been picked up by the KGB. The archives are now being opened, and recently we received 1,200 documents from the KGB. Other astronauts have openly admitted to sightings. No one understood what it was. It was a triangular white bright object. It did not send any message. It was definitely a UFO. Santa Claus was the code name used by U.S. astronauts to indicate the presence of flying saucers next to space capsules. According to Maurice Chatelain, the space engineer who designed the Apollo communication system, the term was first used by Walter Schirra on a Mercury 8 flight.
I recently worked with a man whose experiences occurred in the Philippine Islands, another man whose experiences occurred in Israel. I've received letters from people in Saudi Arabia. I've worked with someone from Japan. This is a totally global phenomenon.
The abduction question is very complex, and at the same time, very bizarre. According to this story from Italy, an intelligent entity selected an unsuspecting couple, induced amnesia, and manipulated their reality with no visible purpose.
Questo era uno dei casi di teletrasporto più strani. I was researching stories on the paranormal for an article I was writing, and I came across a most bizarre event which took place in Turin in 1993. Now, Turin is a large industrial city in northern Italy with a long history of black magic and paranormal phenomena. And it was in Turin that I met a doctor and his wife. They told me their story on condition that I do not reveal their true identities, so I will refer to them as Dr. Giorgio Tomasi and to his wife as Ileana. Dr. Tomasi was a doctor at the Mauriziano Hospital, one of the oldest and most prestigious in the city. One Sunday afternoon in September 1993, he and his wife left their home to drive to the wedding of a friend in a town about 20 miles away. As they were driving, Giorgio noticed a dark shape in the sky trailing them. He knew it could not be an aircraft or helicopter because he couldn't hear any engine noise.
I saw it very clearly. It was a bright ball of light that moved quickly toward us. As it approached, I started feeling drowsy. My eyelids became heavy, and I could not keep my eyes open.
The car began to slow down by itself, in spite of the fact that he was pressing down hard on the gas. The speedometer registered 10 miles per hour, and he was still losing speed. He pulled off to the side of the road and turned the engine off. when he noticed on the side of the mountain ahead a strange light formation rotating and spinning. Then an electrical cloud enveloped the car. The car was surrounded by hundreds of bolts of lightning striking simultaneously. The doctor and his wife were instantly transported through a time and space warp to a different country over 1,500 miles away. Not only were they in a different location, they seemed to be moving around in complete freedom. One minute they were driving, the next minute they were walking through a field. Then they were driving again, then they were inside an ancient city, roaming through the temples.
Ho avuto una netta sensazione fisica. I remember very strongly that it was a very physical experience. I remember exactly the smell of the sea and the wind on my skin. I don't think there are words to describe this kind of experience because I knew very well that I wasn't dreaming, and yet I could not possibly make sense of what was happening.
As in similar cases, the aim seems to be to confuse and disorient the witnesses, overwhelming and teasing them at the same time. And the experience is always elusive, just like in a dream.
From deep inside the temple, the intense light appeared again, floating in the air. The ball of light then wrapped around them in a scanning motion, and then suddenly they were sitting in their car in the hills of Turin again. Their watches and the clock in the car had stopped at 4 o'clock, the time when they first saw this light. Scared and confused about what they had just experienced, the couple decided to continue on to the wedding. When they arrived at the church, they realized that several hours had passed. Later that night, Dr. Tomasi and his wife paid a visit to a psychiatrist friend who conducted some tests.
Dr. Tomasi and la signora sono passati presso il mio studio.
Dr. Tomasi and his wife came to see me within the first 3 hours of the incident. I can verify that their cortisone level was around 60 micrograms per milliliter, which is 4 times the normal level. This indicates an unusually high stress situation.
The next day, the doctor returned to the spot where he pulled off the road and took some samples of the earth where the electrical activity had occurred.
The earth sample I have analyzed indicated that the area was exposed to temperatures of 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. The grass samples showed a substantial breakdown of the chlorophyll molecules with no residue of radiation. I absolutely believe that it really happened, and it was a real event.
How real was the experience? We can only speculate that whatever this alien mind might be, it will have a hard time getting through our walls of fears and superstitions, and might have to play symbolic games in order to get its message across, as if it were dealing with a child.
The idea of the stream of time flowing from the past through the present into the future is actually an artifact of our consciousness. It's not really the way the universe is constructed.
The disappearance of military planes to UFOs has been a subject hotly debated since the earliest incidents in the Bermuda Triangle. This case is corroborated by substantial testimonial evidence and good research by a respected military man.
Recent developments of interest here in the United States among researchers like myself and colleagues of mine is the apparent abduction or capture of up to 5 American jet fighters by alien vehicles commonly known as UFOs. These captures began in September of 1988 when we lost the first fighter jet, Navy fighter jet, to action by a UFO.
Hotel 3532 to LSO, over.
This is LSO, go ahead.
Hotel 3532. I see a large aircraft. It appears to be at Angel 10, over.
This is LSO. Can you identify the bogey, over?
Negative. Bogey is heading at 090 at undetermined speed, over.
This is LSO. Radar shows no aircraft in your vicinity, over.
It's flying right at me from the rear now. I just saw a bright flash. They're closing in.
I see bogey now, heading 180, very fast, over.
It just flew past me very fast.
What is your status? Hotel 3532, over.
Here it comes again.
LSO to Hotel 3532. My instruments are not responding. Can you identify bogey, over? LSO to Hotel 3532. Come in, Hotel 3532. LSO to Hotel 3532. Come in. Come in, Hotel 3532. LSO to Hotel 3532. Come in.
And a couple months later, in December of 1988, we had two F-14 Tomcat jet fighters captured by a large delta-shaped craft over Cabo Rojo, the southwest corner of Puerto Rico.
No traces were ever found of either the planes or the pilots. Colonel Stevens was told by the Navy that the F-14s were lost at sea. In reply to a request from a member of Congress, Rear Admiral David Rogers, Deputy Assistant Chief of Air Warfare, stated that there were no mysterious incidents involving U.S. Navy aircraft during that time frame. And yet several witnesses around Cabo Rojo noticed search helicopters over the waters the day after the incident.
When a military security is penetrated to that degree, as easily as UFOs and ETs penetrated it, the government is not going to tell a foreign power that this had happened.
I always warn people never to believe anything they say about this subject. One is the aliens themselves and the other is the United States government, because both lie and have lied and deceived. So don't believe the aliens, don't believe the Air Force.
Jorge Martin, a UFO researcher who has investigated the case, interviewed several witnesses.
Hubo una rara explosión en Laguna Cabo en 87. There was a very strange explosion in Laguna Cabo Rojo in 87. After that, I started seeing a lot of UFOs. I hear from people that there is an alien base near Laguna, but I do not know. All I know is that on March 17th, 91, I saw a UFO floating over the electrical station. It seemed to draw power from it. More than 100 people saw this. Then we had a major blackout and the generators were completely ruined.
On December 28, 1988, I saw this enormous triangular shape. I ran to get my binoculars, and then I noticed two F-14s. They tried to intercept it, and then I don't know what happened. If the jets entered the UFOs by the rear or the side, they never came out. Then the whole thing was gone.
Martin later received a communication from a U.S. Navy source saying that the incidents were seen on radar and immediately classified top secret. Physicists, as well as abductees, talk about the existence of multiple and parallel realities. Is it possible that the F-14s vanished through a time-space gap into one of these dimensions?
They seem to travel in an other way entirely, possibly something like transmitting from one point to another, where distance is not a factor in the equation.
There have been thousands of abduction cases reported worldwide, with the abductees claiming to have been almost broken by the experience. And yet, out of the ashes of this frightening experience emerges a story of visionary change with a biblical ring to it.
İsmim Sedat Vural, fizik profesörüyüm. My name is Sedat Vural.
I'm a physicist, and this story was told to me in great detail by a friend of mine who is a professor of psychology at the University of Istanbul. This colleague of mine, whose reputation is impeccable, has not gone public with this bizarre story for fear of ridicule in his conservative academic community. So we will refer to him as Professor Önder. Professor Önder was visited in 1985 by a young man, Arun Özbek, whom he had known for many years since they were both from the same small town in eastern Anatolia. Arun had recently moved to Istanbul, where he had got a job as a guard in Topkapı Palace. Arun considered this to be an important career move, since Topkapı Palace is one of the most important museums in the world. One summer day in 1985, Arun was leading the last group through the palace. As he was preparing to close the section, he heard a strange buzzing sound coming from inside the quarters. As he retraced his steps in the now empty palace, the sound seemed to be receding. As he moved around it, kept changing directions. He quickly lost track of time in his chase. Topkapı was now closed, and he didn't realize until much later that he had spent over an hour listening to a sound that was possibly coming from inside his head. As the buzzing sound intensified and became high-pitched, he lost consciousness. His earliest recollection was of waking up on the roadside on the outskirts of town. He didn't remember a thing. He then made his way back to Topkapı. He was shocked to find out that he had been absent for 3 days and was fired. His wife had reported his disappearance to the police.
Arun o gece eve gelmeyince çok heyecanlandı.
She told him it was completely out of character, and she feared that something terrible had happened to her husband. Finally went to see Professor Önder. Professor Önder put him through deep hypnotic regressions. I've read Professor Önder's transcripts of the sessions, and they show a person under tremendous stress. During the first session, Arun revealed an intense light had blasted through the roof opening. He was totally blinded. He started talking about being pulled through the roof over the palace and of floating over Istanbul. A group of tourists sailing the Bosphorus that same day had spotted a light zigzagging through the sky. Among them was a journalist from Ankara who reported the sighting in a local paper.
The young man was sent to a local hospital for tests. The mark on his chest was diagnosed as a first-degree burn of unknown cause. His blood lymphocyte level was down to 15% of normal. The report stated that the dizziness, headaches, and the extremely low count was a consequence of a dangerous exposure to gamma ray radiation in the order of 150 Röntgen. Exposure to this level of radiation can be lethal.
During a second session with Professor Önder, Arun became so afraid he started shaking. He described how a 3-foot alien emerged from out of the light and stood in front of him. The alien touched him and he lost consciousness.
Harun left town and family and disappeared. Professor Önder later discovered that the young man had joined the Sufis, a mystical Muslim sect with ancient origins. Whitley Strieber, author of Communion, says the aliens refer to Earth as a school of souls. Was the alien experience the trauma that initiated a religious conversion? Dr. Bruce Cornett, whose story you are about to hear, has a bachelor's degree in biology, a master's in paleobotany from the University of Connecticut, and a PhD in geology from Penn State University. Dr. Cornett's impressive scientific background makes his story all the more incredible.
In 1992, I started a 20 square mile magnetic survey using a proton magnetometer. And over a period of about 2.5 years, I accomplished acquiring 1,800 stations worth of measurements. Now that's a lot of data. And I was able to generate a map which showed the natural geology, or reflected the natural geology below the valley floor. But also in the process of getting all those measurements, I came across a number of magnetic anomalies that could not be explained by anything natural, and certainly not cultural. And what I discovered was a series of strange spikes in magnetism, fluctuations in magnetism that were well out of the range of anything that is natural. I took this to a physicist who had worked for the Navy, and I showed the readings to him, and he freaked out. He said, "Do you know what you have here?" And I said, "No, what?" He says, "You have evidence that proves the existence of a theory that we think exists, but we have not yet been able to duplicate it." And I said, what is that? He says, "You've demonstrated the existence of polarized magnetic photon beams." And I said, "Well, magnetic light?" And I didn't think light was magnetic. He says, "Well, this is the theory. We thought that this could exist, and what you're showing me is data that indicates it does exist."
The Hudson Valley in upstate New York is a hotspot of UFO activities. Multiple witnesses have seen craft appear and disappear into the ground at Pine Bush, New York. According to Dr. Hynek, a UFO the size of 3 football fields was seen by 6 security guards as it hovered at 300 feet above the ground. Residents have reported radio and TV interference, sudden electrical surges, and electromagnetic disturbances. Cars have been known to accelerate and decelerate by themselves.
Following my return to the area, something very unusual happened. In this particular site, as I had taken 2 measurements, and on the 3rd measurement, when I pushed the button, I heard this crack, gunshot going off. I felt a sting in my chest. I took off my equipment and I lifted up my shirt and I found this very large brown bruise on my chest about the size of a quarter. When I got in my car and started coming back home, this brilliant light was waiting for me. And this thing, whatever it was, paces me all the way home. And I tried to catch up to it. It matches my speed. So I slow back down to the speed limit, and it slows back down. I don't know of anything other than a helicopter that can do that. All of a sudden, this cluster of lights unfolded a pair of wings. These huge wings came out, small lights projected out onto the wings, and then I heard a sound of jet engines come on. It rotated, turned into the flight path towards Stewart Airport, which is about 10 miles away. It was a perfect shape of a Boeing 707, but even though it sounded like a jet as it went over it, it had no engine pods on its wings. This pattern continued regularly. Every time I would go out into the field, the craft would come out and do performances for me. Were they coming out just to greet me and say hi? Well, I quickly discovered that there was much more complex than that. They were trying to educate me and broaden my understanding of their technology and their capabilities. In one particular case, when this happened, I was with a friend. He was a reporter for New York Times who had come up and seen this stuff enough times that he was convinced of its non-earthly or non-human nature. As we entered the area, the UFO hotspot area, here comes this brilliant white light, plasma light with a red light behind it. And I said, "Okay, Fred, watch what he's going to do." coming up to this intersection in a stoplight. As we slow down, he's going to slow down. He's going to stop right over the intersection in front of us. And Fred had never seen this before, so this was a new experience for him. As we slowed down for the red light, sure enough, this UFO slowed down right ahead of us and stopped right over the intersection. I said, okay, we're going to turn left now, Fred. Put on your left blinker. So as he puts on his left blinker, the UFO turns to its left, and we turn left, and it starts pacing us off to the right. As we're driving down, I'm saying, well, we're going to come up to a turn up ahead. We're going to make a right turn just around the curve up ahead. The UFO speeds ahead, waits for us at the turn so that when we get to the turn, he's waiting there for us. Now, how did he know? Unless he could read my thoughts.
Experiments with microwaves point to the possibility that areas of the brain can be stimulated from a distance. Slow pulsed microwaves can create memory lapse. Controlled memory could possibly work the same way.
I've had a number of x-rays done, skull x-rays, and also CAT scan done. When you look at the side x-ray, you find out that there are some interesting spaces or areas in my skull that lack bone in the precise location that abductees have described having implants placed within their skulls. One is directly below the ear, right below the auditory canal, and through the mastoid bone. You can also see very faintly an artificial object just in front of the pituitary gland, in front of the brain. If you take a look at this brain, there are two places within it where this implant might be located, which would give me the image that I am seeing. One is directly in front of the pituitary gland here, marked in red. The black is at the optic chiasm, the crossing of the optic nerves. There's also another place behind the pineal gland, adjacent to the occipital lobes, which image the peripheral vision. What I see when I move my eyes from left to right is a pair of bright circles. These are not flashing lights. These look more like what I would classify as panther eyes staring me back in the blackness of my mind. Am I seeing what was supposedly put into my head to image what I was seeing and transmit it to some remote viewing apparatus?
In this bizarre story, UFOs are behaving both as physical and psychic events. Once the line of communication is set up, the aliens who have become personal guides convey complex messages to Dr. Cornett, designed to enlighten and help humans. These statements, usually dismissed as pathology, have nevertheless uncanny parallels with contacts from other times. UFO messengers are the modern equivalent of angels, the cosmic messengers of ancient history.
On the night of June 8, 1988, in Corhampton, England, several farmers watched a number of pulsing lights move silently across the sky and hover above a field of winter barley. In the morning, they found 3 circles, each about 30 feet in diameter, in which the crop was swirled and compressed. No footsteps in the ground around the circles, no human trace.
There have been circles in all sorts of different parts of Britain, and indeed all over the world. There have been circles reported in Canada, in Australia, the USA, Japan, many countries in Europe. Certainly there have been circles this year in Sweden, and there have been a lot in Hungary.
In 1978, 3 geologists on a surveying expedition 70 miles from Moscow had a very unusual experience. The language they recorded was unidentifiable, foreign, not a known language. When the incident concluded, they noticed that their clocks were turned back several hours. But the experience had seemed to last no more than a minute. In the morning, they found a large, perfectly shaped hole a few hundred feet from the tent. Their compass began spinning out of control, and the circle area appeared to be highly magnetized.
5 years ago, I was walking with my dog along one of our cornfields. It was a wonderful summer day in June. The sun was high. It was very, very quiet. And then suddenly we heard this incredibly loud blast. Well, of course, my dog jumped around and started behaving very nervously. And we went towards the area where the bang had come from, and I saw the most extraordinary sight. The crop was bending frantically, really, in a clockwise direction, and it was spiraling around and making crackling and electrical noises, and also there were some blue flashes coming from the cornfield. Well, of course, I was riveted, and I watched fascinated as a circle formed in front of my eyes out of the vortex, and then everything suddenly fell silent.
What is the energy that performed such feats? Did the events take place in the physical world? And if they took place in the mind of the witness, what was the source of the energy that caused it?
From 1988 through until 1991, there was a great development in the circles in England, and we got many extraordinary and articulate shapes.
The pictogram discovered in Bradbury, England on July 17, 1991, is a complex geometrical shape with mystical and alchemical meaning related to the Kabbalah. In 1991 in Cambridgeshire, this heart-shaped circle was discovered by researchers. The shape is also one of the most complex mathematical symbols called the Mandelbrot set.
Is this display of wizardry designed to impress us or confuse us?
There is a need for the world to be awakened, to be educated, to take a new view of how we should behave and where we fit in the universe. The time is now.
Eventually we will understand that our relationship to beings from other worlds or other zones of reality
goes back to the very beginning of our sense of time.
Science knows that there could easily be over 1 million advanced civilizations in our galaxy of several 100 billion stars.
The meaning of the alien experience may be the collective experience of seeing our own future image in the mirror. The solution to the alien enigma might ultimately be found in the human mind.